Hi, this is Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and the structure presented by the Orange Spine Easleys. Alright, so let me quickly define the Orange Spine Easleys. The Orange Spine Easleys are 12 Dungeons and Dragons hardcovers. They are all 1E. They are all Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. They were all published between 1983 and 1987, and they all have a visually distinct orange spine. All right? These 12 books, in my opinion, represent the absolute pinnacle of Dungeons & Dragons overall design at the macro level. Okay? And so basically what these books are is they're really special in history because they're Gary Gygax's material with other TSR authors mixed in, and it's basically everything he built for Dungeons & Dragons right up to the point where he leaves TSR, okay? And so this is really done, it's Gary Gygax's vision executed at maximum pinnacle performance. That's what the Orange Spine Easleys are. It's Dungeons & Dragons in 12 books. It's the pinnacle of Gary Gygax's work, okay? All right, so when we realize the importance of the Orange Spine Easleys, we can then look at structure, okay? When you look at the 12 books, right, this is what Gary Gygax created, right? This is Dungeons & Dragons at its base elements. We can look at the books, all 12 books together, and we can look at the structure that Gary Gygax and the top Dungeons & Dragons designers of the first 12 years, right, what they did together, right? So let's look at that structure. For me, I'm going to use a mnemonic. Their structure is RUSP, which is rules, survival, okay? Rules, survival, setting, bolster, and expansion, all right? So it's rules, survival, setting, bolster, and expansion, right? All right, so, excuse me. Let's dig in. All right, so let's talk about, let's specifically talk about the rules. So 25%, 3 of the 12 books are the core rules. It's the DMG, the PHB, and the Monster Manual. Excuse me. All right, so you have those books. Now, of course, these are absolutely, critical. It's really important that they're there and they're in place, right? One of the things I just want to talk about with those core 3, the core rule books, is the core rule books are so, they're absolutely central to the game. They are the books that are absolutely necessary to play, right? So really, the other 75% are worthless without the core rule books. So that's important to understand. Also, one thing that's really interesting is, so the other thing you want to think about is the core rule books, the 3 core rule books, they serve as essentially jumping stones from edition to edition to edition, right? So as we go from edition to edition to edition, from 1st to 2nd to 3rd to 4th to 5th, right? The traveler, right, who's walking along with the history of Dungeons and Dragons, is leaping across a stone, stones that are going across a lake, and basically these are your stepping stones. The core rule books are in, all 3 of them are in every single edition, right? And they have to be there, and they serve as the first contact point for every single edition. So they're really essential, right? So they're there, they're the foundation, they're really important, okay? All right, now, what is the one other, so basically, for RUSP, for rules, settings, survival, okay, bolster, and expansion, rules is 25% of all 12 books, okay? What is the next 25%? The only other category of structure that equals the same amount in percent-wise as the core rule books? Well, that is setting, okay? That is setting, all right? So there are 3 setting books in the Orange Spine Easleys, right? There is Dragonlance, there is Oriental Adventures, and there is Greyhawk Adventures, okay? Well, let's talk about these, all right? So Greyhawk Adventures is, hey, I remember Tolkien. Greyhawk is really Tolkien with the serial numbers filed off, right? We get that. Dragonlance is an admission by Gary Gygax that he wanted the game to go beyond his own vision. He wanted the game to include brilliant ideas and brilliant worlds from other people. And this is not a small thing, right? We're dealing with this very same issue today. There are 3 authors right now that lacked exactly the same type of bold vision that Gary Gygax had for his game, right? Perfect example of this is J.K. Rowling, right? Unlike George R.R. Tolkien, unlike George Lucas, who allowed the Star Wars world, Star Wars universe to have many authors in it, right? Harry Potter is it's absolutely slammed rock solid, and it really doesn't escape J.K. Rowling's control, right? She could bring on additional, she doesn't, right? So it's not a small thing that Dragonlance existed, and Dragonlance was Gary Gygax saying, I want there to be worlds here that go beyond me, right? And just so you're aware, the Greyhawk Adventures was not written by Gary Gygax, but it really was Gary Gygax's world, and somebody else was just doing the work to kind of formulate that, right? But Dragonlance was really unique, and it was the vision of Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss, right? Very, very important. So Dragonlance is the idea that the settings should, that other people other than the game's creators should be creating settings. It's a really big thing, right? Oriental Adventures, very, very important setting. And Oriental Adventures is Gary Gygax saying, Dungeons & Dragons is about Tolkien. Dungeons & Dragons is about worlds that other people are going to bring you to. But Dungeons & Dragons is really about our world as well, right? And so here, Oriental Adventures was Gary Gygax saying, I'm a huge fan of Japanese history and culture, and I want there to be this part of Dungeons & Dragons where we are reflecting our own world, right? Now, this has become a little problematic. Now, 45 years later, we looking at Oriental Adventures like, is that the best idea? And if there is going to be an Oriental Adventures, should there be, who should be writing that? Maybe people who are from Japan or China, so that one's a little different, and, with more time, we have a little more perspective on that. But 25% of the Orange Spine Easleys is setting, and that's important, right? So, and Gary Gygax and TSR was saying, with the settings, we want them to be varied. We want Tolkien to be in there as well, because that's what people expect. And we also want these settings to reflect our own world, right? We want to shine the light of Dungeons & Dragons on cultures within our own world and see what comes back from that. What reflection comes back from that light being shined, right? Really, really quite interesting. Okay, let's talk about survival. There are 2 survival books in the Orange Spine Easleys, right? The Dungeon Survival and the Wilderness Survival. And I just really think that right now in Dungeons & Dragons in 5th edition, there's this beautiful 3-word sketch of what Dungeons & Dragons is. It's combat, it's interaction, and it's exploration, right? That exploration part, that came from this survival area, right? And here, Gary Gygax was trying to tell players and dungeon masters, you are going to explore dungeons, right? You're going to go into places that have been buried and hidden, right? You're going to explore history, right? Of civilizations that are long past, right? But in addition to that, you're going to explore the world above. You're going to go through forests and deserts and tundra and plains and swamps. You're going to go off to islands, right? And the wilderness books allowed that to really capture that survival within the wilderness. So survival saying, so of course you have, right? You have the monster manual, and every player knows that these monsters are going to try to kill your characters, right? And that you're going to slay them, and they're going to be protecting some kind of treasure, right? But Gygax was also saying the environment is more than just a monster, right? The environment is dangerous, right? And that there are, traps and environmental hazards that are going to be incredibly dangerous, and they're going to be in dungeons, and they're going to be below the ground, and they're going to be above the ground, right? And so this idea that survival, that your character is going to have to face challenges even well beyond monsters is really, really important. So survival is one of the categories of structure that is being presented to us by the Orange Spine Easleys, right? Next is bolster. What do I mean by bolster? Well, when you bolster something, you make it stronger, you increase it, you enhance it, right? So what are the bolster books? By the way, the survival guide, those two books are 17% of the Orange Spine Easleys. Let's talk about the bolster books. There are two bolster books. They are also 17% of the Orange Spine Easleys, okay? So let's talk about those bolster books, right? So there are two bolster books. There is Unearthed Arcana and Monster Manual, okay? Monster Manual 2, excuse me. So the Monster Manual 2, it's not bringing anything new to Dungeons & Dragons, right? From the macro level. What it is doing is it is iterating deeper into monsters, right? And this is incredibly important because it's saying, hey, monsters are so important in this game that we can't fit them all into one book. We need to double that, right? And that's no small thing. It says monsters are incredibly important to the game of Dungeons & Dragons. Totally agree with that. I really like that the Monster Manual 2 is there, but it is a bolstering. It is saying some parts of what we, the designers, have already created can't be squeezed into a single book. They need to be expanded even to another book, right? What is Unearthed Arcana? Unearthed Arcana is really, in my opinion, arguably Dungeon Master Guide 2, right? So Unearthed Arcana is really a situation where again, Gary Gygax and TSR's premium writers, right, are saying we can't squeeze this all in, right? The Dungeon Master Guide, what we need to give to Dungeon Masters to equip them is overflowing. It is overflowing this singular volume. We need to go into essentially a second Dungeon Master guide, right? So Unearthed Arcana and Monster Manual 2 are bolstering. They're saying we, the creators, have a lot to say and we have a lot to do. And in these specific books, it can't fit all in one. It's overflow area. These are overflows. And that means that the Monster Manual overflowed and the Dungeon Master Guide overflowed. Now, why is there no additional Player's Handbook? Why did that not overflow? All right, well, you're gonna hear something surprising. To me, it is the one. Gary Gygax, as much as I herald his time on this earth, as much of a hero as he is, as much of an intellectual champion he is to me, as much as a writer champion he is to me, as much as just a design champion he is to me, he was still a human being. That's important for us to remember, right? It's hard for me, to me, Gary Gygax is a lot like, George Washington. Like, he seems like a larger-than-life figure, but he was mortal, and he was human, right? And this is the one area where I think he made a mistake. I think there should have been a PHB 2, right? An overflow volume of the Player's Handbook. Now, perhaps one of the reasons why was, again, because of Gary Gygax's genius. If there had been one more book, if there had been an overflow book for the Player's Handbook, we would have had 13 books, which that would have been unlucky, right? So maybe Gary knew what he was doing, but I think it's the one mistake that exists in 1E Dungeons & Dragons design that's pretty significant, right? And that really hasn't been revealed through history. History often reveals our mistakes, right? But this was just a design. It was just a design mistake, in my opinion, right? So let's talk about the last structure element, which is expansion, 16%. Okay, the last 16% of the 100% are the expansion books. Okay, now what are the expansion books? Well, they are Legends and Lore, okay, which is the deities and demigods, just under a new title. And then in addition to that, there's Manual of the Planes. Now, why do I say this is expansion? Right? Well, this is expanding where the players could go, where the player characters could go. So Legends and Lore is a huge expansion. It's an incredibly important expansion, right? It is expanding beyond the physical and the mental into the spiritual, right? So Legends and Lore expands the game of Dungeons and Dragons beyond the physical and mental realms of the player characters to a spiritual realm, right? And again, it's absolutely brilliant. Gary Gygax, in my opinion, even when he was first creating Dungeons and Dragons, was saying, we as people, in order to be whole, we have 3 dimensions, not 2. 3, right? There is a physical dimension to us. There is a mental dimension to us. Nobody questions these things. But I think Gary Gygax from the very beginning was using Dungeons and Dragons to say, we as human beings have a spiritual dimension as well, right? And that's what Legends and Lore is. It's an expansion of where the player characters can interact, right? Beyond the physical and mental to the spiritual, right? And then last, let's talk about Manual of the Planes, right? This is one of the most I'll tell you, this one, it's hard for me to express how much respect I have for Gary Gygax and how much, how thankful I am, just for living in this time where I can enjoy Dungeons and Dragons. And Manual of the Planes is one of those ones that is just, it's such an important book. It's hard to overstate the importance of it, right? And so so Gary Gygax had said, hey, here's Oriental Adventures, here's Greyhawk, here's Dragonlance. And within the core rule books, you can create your own worlds, right? So, there's almost no limits to what you can do with this game, right? But with Manual of the Planes, he was saying, you're not even bound by this plane of existence. You can create entire, I don't want you to build a world. I want you to build entire planes, right? And, now Wizards of the Coast, who owns Dungeons & Dragons, Hasbro owns them, Wizards of the Coast owns Dungeons & Dragons, but they have the game of Magic the Gathering, which has gotten mixed into our Dungeons & Dragons game, and they have this concept of planeswalkers, right? And the reality is, Gary Gygax was thinking about planeswalkers, in between 1983 and 1986, right? And was just saying, I want this game to really explode the limits of where you can be and where you can explore, right? And he was just saying that, I've given you 3 settings, right? I've equipped you with the 3 books to build your own worlds, but I want you to go even further than that and build your own planes. And the Manual of the Planes is a map to building our own planes, and it's just this huge expansion of saying there's so few limits. Our only limits are our imagination, and Manual of the Planes is an expansion of the scope of the entire game. And it was just saying, hey, this is important, and there's almost no limits to what we can accomplish with Dungeons and Dragons. I think it's really important to remember the structure presented within the Orcspine Easleys, right? So we have those 5 different categories. We have rules. That's 25% of the Orcspine Easleys. Settings, equal to the rules in percentage. 25% of the Orcspine Easleys are given to settings. We, in addition to the rules and settings, we have survival. Survival is 17% of the overall Orcspine Easleys, right? We have Bolster, like these books that have overflowed their pages and created new volumes, right? So we have Bolster, that's another 17%. And last we have Expansion, which is 16% of the Orcspine Easleys. And that's 100% of all the design for 1E. It's truly incredible. And so you can see the Orcspine Easleys are captured by 5 words: rules, settings, survival, bolster, and expansion. That is the structure of Dungeons and Dragons, right? It's important for us to understand it now and to see it, right? To see the full vision of what Gary put in front of us. Truly, truly incredible books. I'm really, really just becoming a bigger and bigger fan of the Orcspine Easleys. They really are. Dungeons and Dragons is such an amazing game. And when you take that microscope and you just look a little closer at D&D, you just see beauty in every cell, right? And I think the Orcspine Easleys are really, really important. I'd love to know your thoughts. Do you think the categories break down the way I defined it? How would you define the categories? Please let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.